Hey guys, welcome to Wood Magazine and welcome to my shop. I'm going to be working on a project for an upcoming issue in the magazine. This is a little small, I would call it a weekend type project. It's actually a TV stand. Not a big piece of furniture that you set your TV on top of, but this is a stand to replace those plastic feet that come with your TV when you get it. This is a project to kind of show off some of your woodworking skills. It's got some pretty cool embedded little techniques in it. Simple little weekend build, and I hope you enjoy the video. Stay tuned. Thanks. So we have our dovetail bar stock machined. It's an 1.25 inch thick blank, and I've got it cut to 4 inches by 30. So what I'm going to do is lay out a dovetail so we can go to the saw and make a couple cuts and create that dovetail. First thing we need to do is create a line for which will be our shoulder, and that is the thickness of the piece that it will be mating with. And then secondly, we need to make a couple angled marks. And those angled marks are set at 18 degrees, and I'm just using a simple little adjustable angle finder here. And these are super easy to use, super handy, and in this situation work just really, really well. So I'm going to lay that right on the corner of that piece, and I'm going to mark a line. And then I'm going to change that to the opposing, which will be 72 degrees on this, but if you subtract 18 from 90, you should get 72. And then I'm going to make my second mark over here. You can go ahead and mark the other end if you'd like. Quite honestly, what we're going to be doing though is we're going to be setting our saw blade up to that corresponding 18 degrees and making that first cut, and then we're going to flip the piece around and make that cut. We won't even see our line. And when you flip it to the other end, once you have it set, you shouldn't have to mark those others. You certainly can if you'd like, but certainly not necessary. So next up, we're going to go to the saw, we're going to make that angle cut, and then we're going to make those shoulder cuts to create our dovetail. I've set that blade to match this angle, and of course you can do that with a sliding bevel or whatever. These work really good too. They're just a digital readout that gives you kind of a pretty accurate plus or minus of a tenth or two of degrees accuracy. So those are pretty handy to have when you're doing things like this. I've raised my blade up so it will be just shy of the top of that blade. I do not want the top of that blade crossing into that shoulder cut here. And you can't get all the way into the corner with your blade. You're going to have to do some chisel work or a little handsaw work, and we'll do that in a little bit here. But you just want to make sure you stay below that line. All we're doing is we're going to make a cut here. I'm going to flip this piece around, make the cut on the corresponding side. I've got a stop block here and a tall fence to support my work piece. I'm going to cut both these ends, and then I'm going to flip the part over end for end, and then we'll cut the other two ends, and then reset for our shoulder cut. I'm going to clamp this in place so it doesn't move on me. And now that I've got those angles, those angle cuts made, I'm going to kind of reconfigure my miter gauge here, and then we're going to cut that shoulder cut on those, and we'll come back in, clean those up with a chisel, and we'll be ready to move on to the next part. Okay, now that I've got my angled cuts made on both ends of the stretcher here, I want to make my shoulder cuts. So I've basically lowered my blade, so I want to make sure I don't get into that edge of the dovetail. So I've lined it up with my line, I've raised it so I'll stay out of that, and then again, as I said before, we'll clean up the remainder of that with a chisel. See that or not in there, but it leaves just a little tiny little notch in there, but we can easily clean that up with a little chisel work. We're going to move it to the bench, and that's what we're going to do next. Just be careful when you're making this cut down into that corner, is that you don't get too aggressive with your chisel and bypass that angle line coming down. So we just want to work at this a little bit at a time. We'll make that first cut down, and then we'll come back. We'll kind of work into the end grain. And I'm using pretty much after a hand pressure to clean that corner right out of there. You can see how nicely that breaks out, how easy that is to create a really nice tight shoulder. We'll just go ahead and repeat that for the rest of them. And then next up, we'll use this dovetail to kind of help lay out or the foot that this is going into. We've got our dovetail bar ready to go. I have now cut some blanks for the, they're calling them the outriggers or the feet. This is basically what the dovetail bar is going to rest into on either end. And we're going to create our socket, if you will, there on that piece. Now, we could go to the table saw, make a couple angle cuts at certain depth, and then try to figure out how to clean that out, you know, on the band saw and a little chisel work and all that. And so what I decided to do is I took this stock. It's basically, it finishes out at 2.5. I made it 2 3/4. And then basically what I did is I split this into 3 pieces. The first piece being that top, which is going to be the same thickness as the dovetail bar, and then the filler, and then of course this will get chopped off, and I'll have 2 feet out of this piece. But then I can glue it back together. I can get a really tight joint when I glue it back together using this as the guide to do it, and I get a really nice fit. So what I'm going to do is going to basically lay this dovetail out on here and use this as my guide. I did cut these that are finished out at 12 inches. I cut mine at 12.5. That way when I'm machining these and then gluing them back together, if I don't get my ends perfectly smooth and flush, I can come back in and trim those ends. It gives me a little material to work with. So just keep that in mind when you're using the dimensions in the plans. I'm going to lay out a line 3 1/4 in from the end here, which is where that dovetail starts. The drawings will say 3 inches, but because I've got an extra length material, I'm going to add that 1/4. Okay, just make a little tick mark there, and then I'm going to lay the dovetail bar on there. I'm going to line that corner up right here with that tick mark, making sure my shoulders are flush with the inside face. And it's pretty simple at that point. I'm just making some pencil lines so I can determine where those cuts are going to be. I will definitely cut on that inside that line. I have the extra material. Again, we're going to cut these flush at the end. So I'm going to make those cuts, mark this other end, and then I'm going to make those cuts on the table saw. We'll come back and then we'll start to glue these outriggers back together. I've turned my miter gauge to 18 degrees, and I made a cut in my fence there to kind of know where I'm going to be. And I'm taking that first line and I'm putting it on the outside of that blade. I'm going to make that cut. I'm keeping this piece. And then what I didn't show you before I left the bench is I actually made a mark down the face of this work piece. This way, I basically can come in here and line that up with the saw blade and make that cut. And I don't have to change my miter gauge. So that way I know I'm still at 18 degrees. It's the same for both sides, and hopefully give me a better fit. So let's make those cuts. I'm just lining up with that outside raker there. So these are my 2 pieces. I'll head back over to the bench. I'll make the cut on the other outrigger as well, and then we'll get these things glued up so we get a nice tight fit with our dovetail. First step, I go ahead and glued on my longer piece that I'd cut my angled on. I glued it in place so it was flush on the sides and flush on the end. Now the other end I'm using basically this piece out here as kind of a support, because what I want to do is I want to fit this together so I can get a nice tight fit for the final fit. I'm looking for this edge to be flush on the edges too. You know, if you're not closing up your gaps, you know, aren't closing these up, then you may have to go back and maybe adjust with taking a little material off either the toe or the heel of that angled cut just to get a good fit. Mine worked out. As long as you're staying with the same 18-degree angle and you're really close to that, you should be perfectly fine. So what I'm going to do now is basically add a little bit of glue. And you can see I'm not overdoing that, getting too nutty with that. I lay that in there, and I like to do a little rub joint, which basically all I'm saying is with that is that you're just kind of rubbing that glue back and forth to get the viscosity thicker. The benefit of rubbing that together, getting that viscosity thickened up, is that when you go to do this and throw these clamps on here, we've all kind of been through that before where you get things lined up and then you try to clamp it, and of course everything moves around on you, but that helps avoid that. But then before I walk away and let that dry, I'm going to very carefully pull that out of there. We'll let that set up, then we'll work on the other side. We'll add our feet to this and then basically trim the edges flush. And I think we have to add a little bevel to the front and the back of this as well. So we'll do that next after we get the other side done. Okay, now that we have the dovetail bar and the feet and everything put together, we need to concentrate on the uprights and the mounting plates. And what we have on the top of and the bottom of those mounting uprights are a 4-inch by 3/4 inch notch that then houses the mounting plates. They'll get screwed and plugged into place. But to create that notch, what I've done is I've gone in and I've cut a kerf, which is where I'm going to terminate this cut, 3/4 inch high on my table saw. Used a miter gauge and a stop block, and I did it for both pieces and on both ends. All right, so then I've set up my bandsaw with a fence, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut, keeping that piece tight against the fence, and it's going to end on the inside of that cut, and then we're going to go back to the table saw, and I want to show you a little trick on how to kind of clean up that bandsaw cut. Not everybody can, his bandsaw is tuned up and making a straight bandsaw cut and getting a good clean quality cut sometimes is tough. So I just wanted to show you this technique. So if you can notice that bandsaw cut, it stopped short of the kerf that I cut. Not a lot, maybe 32nd, 64th of an inch, okay? Now we're gonna go to the table saw and I'm gonna show you how I'm gonna clean up that bandsaw edge and make sure it's perfectly flat and straight. All right, now for the second cut, I've got my table saw set up with a blade. I have actually not moved my fence and I haven't changed the height of the blade, so I just left it. So it's exactly where I made that initial cut. So what I'm going to do, and this is, may sound counterintuitive, but this is perfectly safe. I'm taking off very little material, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to slide in, and then I'm going to slide that piece over against the fence. And slide it a little further up, and do the same thing over and over again until, basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove that material across there so it's all going to be the exact same height. It'll actually make a pretty smooth finish on that. So now we know we've got a perfectly straight line across there. If we have to, we can come in there with a little sandpaper, knock off any of the high spots there. But be careful. What you want to really end up with is a nice, really tight joint there, where those come together. Especially when you put your mounting bracket on there and screw and glue it down. So that's what we're after. So now that I have those cut, I'm going to cut my mounting brackets to size. I've got a couple holes to drill for cord management in the sides of these and mount our mounting plates. Now that we have our uprights cut, I drilled some holes here. What I'm doing is I'm trying to create like a little tower, the channel in the back. Wires can kind of go through those holes and you can manage them in here with some zip ties or whatnot. I designed the height of this upright and these mounting brackets for that 48-inch size TV. So if you have a bigger TV, you may want to elongate this. What I really did was measured where that mounting bracket mounts on the TV, and then I put that mounting bracket's going to mount right there, centered on that upper plate, and then you measure down to the bottom of the TV where that's going to be. Because what you're looking for is you want the bottom of the TV to fall below the top of this bracket here, so you don't see the wires behind here. Pretty simple glue and butt joint, making sure that the assembly stays square. And if your joints are flush, and then you cut them all accurately, if you keep them flush, you should be going together square, but it never hurts to throw a square in there and just make sure. I'm using a countersink counterbore bit. So that countersinks and counterbores for just your number 8 screw. And then I'll come back and cut a couple 3/8 inch plugs, and we'll fix that up. Okay, so the only thing left to do here is we'll come back in, plug them, finish sand this. Next up, attach this to our base. So we're getting ready to wrap this project up. I wanted to show you that I've got the tower all complete. Basically, I finished putting the plugs in, getting this finished sanded. This is ready to go. So the last thing we'll have to do here is basically if you notice we've shaped those feet a little bit. Word of caution when you're sanding on these pieces, you want to finish sand everything before you assemble it. But when you're doing that, you want to be careful how much you finish sand on the inside faces of the feet, because obviously it'll change the dynamics or the geometry of your dovetail. And if you sand too much, it will change how that looks. So typically what I do is I try to kind of sand this after I assemble this inside face, just so I know I'm not going to jeopardize that. You can do a little light work, but I would just avoid that if you can. So basically what we're doing is we're adding glue. I'll put some glue on the side walls of that dovetail. Not a lot, because it's all going to end up in the bottom anyway, probably, because my joint's pretty tight. And a liberal amount of glue in the bottom of that. We will slide those together, clamp that tight, finish sand all this stuff, and then finally the last step here will be to glue and screw this down to our dovetail bar. Finish how you guys desire. Obviously the mounting plate for the TV goes here. Mount your TV and enjoy. This project is going to appear in Wood Magazine. Plans are available. If you're not a subscriber, please subscribe to the magazine. If you're not a subscriber to our Wood YouTube, please do that too. And hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll see you next time.